Diane leaned down close enough that her perfume filled the space between them and smiled the way people smile when they've already decided the answer. Sweetheart. Her finger tapped the armrest once, twice, 3 times. First class isn't a mistake anyone makes twice. I've been doing this 12 years, and I have never once seen a black woman your age sitting in 2A without someone having made a very unfortunate error. So why don't we sort this out quietly before it becomes embarrassing for everyone? The old woman didn't move. Diane straightened up, looked her over the floral dress, the worn leather purse, the Bible open on her lap, and let out a short, sharp laugh. Honey, the cleaning crew uses the rear entrance, just so you know for next time. Still, the old woman said nothing. Diane's voice dropped into something colder, something uglier. I don't know who let you up here, but people like you don't belong in these seats. You couldn't afford the coffee we serve back in economy. Then her hand came down. The slap knocked the reading glasses clean off the old woman's face. They skidded across the first-class carpet and stopped at the foot of the seat across the aisle. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 4 phones were already recording. And in 12 minutes, Diane would realize she had just struck the woman who owned the entire aircraft beneath her feet. Stay right here, because this story earns every second. Drop your city and local time in the comments, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. The morning Evelyn May Carter turned 72, she made her bed the same way she had made it every single morning for 51 years. Tight corners, smooth surface, not a wrinkle. Her late husband James used to say that a well-made bed was the first promise a person made to themselves each day, a small private act of discipline that nobody else would see or praise, done simply because it was right. She had not broken that promise once since the morning they lowered him into the ground. She dressed with care. A lavender floral dress that fell just below the knee. Low-heeled shoes she could stand in for hours. Her silver hair pressed and pinned the way her mother had taught her when she was 8 years old in a small kitchen on Lamar Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee. Around her left wrist, a thin gold bracelet, the only jewelry she ever wore, the same one James had fastened there on their wedding day in the summer of 1974 at New Hope Baptist Church, with both their families watching and her father trying not to cry in the third pew. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 3 seconds. Nodded once. Went downstairs. Marcus was already in the kitchen holding a coffee cup. He wasn't really drinking from, watching her with the soft, low-grade worry that had become his permanent expression since his grandfather died. You sure you don't want the private jet Grandma? The Gulfstream is available, and we could literally be wheels up in 40. I want to fly like a person. She lifted the cup from his hands and finished the last 2 sips herself. Get your bag. We'll miss the car. Hartsfield Jackson. Atlanta International Airport was already moving at 7:30. The particular organized chaos that belongs exclusively to major airports on weekday mornings, all rolling luggage and coffee cups, and the distant roar of departure boards turning over. Evelyn walked through it at her own pace. No rush, no performance. She wore a floral dress and sensible shoes, and the bag on her arm was a dark brown leather satchel, worn soft at the corners and faded along the strap. James had brought it home from a business trip to Charleston in the spring of 1989. She could still remember him setting it on the kitchen counter with that quiet look of pride he got whenever he surprised her. She had carried it to board meetings, acquisition closings, and funerals. She had no intention of replacing it. She had come a very long way from the girl who grew up in that 2-bedroom house off Lamar Avenue, where the winter pipes knocked in the walls and the screen door never quite latched. Her father worked the printing press. Her mother cleaned houses on the north side of the city 5 days a week. There had never been much money, But there had been enough of everything that mattered, enough table, enough Bible, and enough expectation pressed firmly into her by two people who believed that the point of surviving hardship was to do something useful with whatever came after. She had met James Carter at a church social when she was 19. He was 22, already lean and serious-eyed, already driving a taxicab he had borrowed money from his uncle to lease. He drove 16 hours a day, saved every dollar he could spare, and in 1971 bought the cab outright. He named the company Carter Transport. By 1985, he had 11 vehicles and a city contract. By 1998, he had moved into regional freight and logistics. He built something real out of nearly nothing, one patient decision at a time, and he never once forgot where he had started. When James died, a Tuesday afternoon in September 2016, a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long, he left behind a company worth $300 million, a house in the Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta, 4 adult children, 9 grandchildren, and a wife who had stood at his side for every decision he had ever made. Most people in the industry expected Evelyn to sell. Instead, she spent 3 years restructuring, acquiring, and expanding with the same quiet discipline James had always practiced. By 68, she was on the Forbes list. By 70, Carter Legacy Group had moved through real estate logistics and aviation infrastructure with a steadiness that made competitors slightly uneasy when they saw her name across a negotiating table. 6 weeks before her birthday, the deal was done. Carter Legacy Group had finalized a controlling acquisition of Horizon Air, 51% of the company's outstanding shares, a transaction valued at just over $2 billion. Regulatory clearance had come through without fanfare. The public announcement was scheduled for the following Tuesday. For now, only Horizon Air's senior leadership team had been formally notified. Evelyn had not requested a private terminal, a security escort, or any form of preferential treatment. Her assistant had booked a first-class seat on Flight 447, Atlanta to Chicago. She was going to watch her granddaughter Simone receive her diploma from Northwestern University. That was the only item on her calendar that mattered today. At the first-class check-in counter, a gate agent named Patricia Hendricks looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. Happy birthday. You and your grandson are all set 2A and 2B window side extra leg room." "Thank you, sweetheart." Evelyn paused. "How is your mother doing? Last month you mentioned the procedure." Patricia stopped typing. Most passengers never asked about anything beyond their own upgrades. "She's doing so much better, actually. Thank you for remembering." Evelyn nodded in the small, quiet way she had when something pleased her. She found her gait settled into a chair by the window, pulled her Bible from her purse. Its pages were soft and dense, with her own handwriting. Underlines, questions, exclamation points pressed hard into the margins. She unwrapped a Werther's Original from the front pocket of her bag, placed it on her tongue. Marcus sat beside her, one knee bouncing lightly. "You doing okay, Grandma?" She turned a page without looking up. "Marcus, I have survived considerably worse things than a 2-hour flight." He smiled, said nothing. Pre-boarding was announced. Evelyn closed the Bible, tucked it into her purse, and walked down the jetway with the unhurried ease of a woman who had nothing left to prove to anyone in this world. She settled into seat 2A, buckled her belt, folded her hands in her lap, and then from somewhere behind her came the sharp, purposeful sound of heels on the boarding bridge. Diane Kowalski had been running late since 6:45 that morning. She had overslept by 19 minutes, not enough to miss her shift, but enough to dismantle the precise routine that kept her functional on early departures. Her coffee went cold in the kitchen while she was in the shower. She argued with her roommate about the electricity bill in the apartment parking lot, in her full uniform in front of a neighbor walking a dog. And somewhere between the interstate and the employee lot at Hartsfield-Jackson, A delivery truck clipped her side mirror at a red light and kept going without slowing down. She signed her paperwork in the crew lounge at 7:12 and told herself today would be fine. Diane was 38 years old and had been a flight attendant with Horizon Air for 12 years. She was technically competent. She knew the emergency procedures cold, kept her service timings tight, even on full flights, and could manage a difficult passenger with practiced efficiency. She had been lead attendant on the 447 Atlanta to Chicago, run for 3 years running. Her formal evaluations were consistently adequate. Her personnel file told a different story. In 2019, a passenger named Darnell Burke had submitted a written complaint stating that Diane had declined to refill his beverage in first class while serving the white passenger seated directly beside him 3 times within the same hour without comment or explanation. The complaint had been reviewed by a regional supervisor, reclassified as a notation of general customer dissatisfaction, and filed without further action. No follow-up call was made to Mr. Burke. No conversation was held with Diane. In 2021, a woman named Gloria Reyes had written a detailed letter to Horizon Air's Human Resources Department. She described how Diane had questioned her first-class ticket, suggested her upgrade had been applied in error, and asked her once at boarding, once after takeoff, whether she had purchased the seat herself or whether someone else had bought it for her. Gloria Reyes held a Horizon Elite membership and had been flying this route in first class for 4 years. The letter had sat in a filing cabinet in a regional HR office for 17 months before anyone opened it. Nobody had ever called Gloria Reyes back. 2 complaints, 2 buried files, and a pattern that did not live in any document it lived in the body. A slight stiffening of the shoulders, a particular narrowing of the eyes, a version of professional courtesy that arrived with unspoken conditions calibrated by something Diane had never examined closely enough to name. She boarded Flight 447 at 8:05, moved through the galley check with Sandra Reyes, her colleague for the morning, and began her walkthrough of first class. Row 1. A businessman in a dark suit already on a call. Fine. Row 2A, an elderly black woman. Lavender floral dress. Worn leather purse on her lap. A Bible open in her hands. Row 2B, a young black man mid-20s settling into his seat. Row 2C, a white man in his mid-50s unfolding a newspaper. Diane's pace did not change. Her expression did not visibly change. But something behind her eyes rearranged itself, a quiet, practiced reorganization, the way a person adjusts their footing before stepping onto uncertain ground. She stopped at 2A and produced the professional smile that 12 years had made automatic. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Evelyn Carter looked up from her Bible without hurry. She turned her phone toward Diane. Seat 2. A first class confirmed. Flight 447, Atlanta to Chicago O'Hare. Diane studied it for considerably longer than the information required. And your ID. Nobody requests identification from a seated passenger on a domestic flight. That process belongs to TSA at the security checkpoint 40 minutes earlier. Boarding passes are scanned and confirmed at the gate. Diane was aware of this. She had been aware of it for 12 years. Evelyn produced her Georgia driver's license without a word. Diane held it and examined it with the focused attention of someone looking for a discrepancy that was not there. The address Buckhead, Atlanta, one of the most expensive zip codes in the state. The photograph a match clearly. The name Carter Evelyn May. None of it delivered the result Diane appeared to be seeking, so she adjusted the angle of attack, How was this ticket purchased? First-class seats on this route require either a Horizon Elite membership or a verified corporate travel account. My assistant handles my bookings. I'll need to verify that. Diane picked up the galley interphone and called the gate without lowering her voice, without stepping away from row 2, without offering Evelyn the small courtesy of conducting this conversation somewhere less public. Hey, it's Diane on 447. I have a passenger in 2A. I need to confirm the booking is legitimate. Something doesn't feel right to me. In seat 2C, Richard Howell lowered his newspaper by 2 inches. 27 years as a corporate litigation attorney had given him a finely tuned ear for the sound of a pretext. He heard it now clearly the way he heard it in deposition rooms, the specific cadence of someone manufacturing a reason after they had already made a decision. At the gate, Patricia Hendricks pulled up the record in under 4 seconds. That's Mrs. Carter Diane. She's fully confirmed, paid first class, everything checks out completely. You're absolutely certain? Completely certain. Diane replaced the phone, stood with her hand resting on it for a moment. Then she walked back to 2A and extended the driver's license toward Evelyn without looking at her. All right, you can take your seat. Evelyn was already in her seat. Had been in her seat the entire time. She took the license back without comment, returned it to her purse, and lowered her eyes to her Bible. No apology, no acknowledgement of the delay, no I'm sorry for the inconvenience or welcome aboard. Nothing that even approximated the basic professional courtesy she would have extended without a second thought to the man in 2C. Just, you can take your seat, delivered in the flat, dismissive tone of someone who had just granted a meaningful favor. Marcus stared at Diane's retreating back, then at his grandmother. Grandma, not yet, baby. She turned a page. Her voice was entirely calm. Let her keep going. In the galley, Diane straightened her jacket, smoothed the front of her uniform, and began arranging the pre-flight service tray. And in some part of herself she was not looking at closely. She had already decided that this was not finished. The pre-flight service began at 8:22. Diane moved through first class with the smooth, unhesitating efficiency of someone who had performed this exact choreography several thousand times. Champagne flute here, warm towel there. A small dish of mixed nuts set down on a linen napkin, with the practiced tilt of someone who understood that first-class passengers paid for the feeling of being attended to, and expected that feeling to be seamless and invisible. She stopped at 2C first. Richard Howell had folded his newspaper and was reviewing documents from a manila folder balanced on his knee. Diane produced a champagne flute with a practiced inclination of her wrist. Good morning, sir. Champagne before departure. Thank you. He took it without looking up. She moved to the couple in row 3, smiled, refilled a glass, asked about the warm nuts. She spent a deliberate, appropriate amount of time at each seat, enough to signal attentiveness, enough to register as excellent service. Then she reached row 2. She placed a glass of sparkling water on Marcus's tray table. Quietly, neatly, without being asked. Then she walked past seat 2A as though it were not there. Evelyn Carter did not look up from her Bible. She did not reach out her hand or lift her eyes or make a sound. She sat exactly as she had been sitting since she boarded, purse at her feet, Bible. In her hands, the thin gold bracelet catching the pale morning light coming in through the oval window beside her. 3 minutes passed. Marcus shifted in his seat. He waited the way people wait when they are trying to be patient, and have nearly exhausted the supply. Then quietly, he raised one hand toward the aisle. Excuse me, could we get some water for my grandmother, please? Diane was halfway to the galley. She turned just enough to confirm she had heard him. We'll get to it. She did not get to it. She returned to the galley reorganized items on the service shelf that did not need reorganizing, and re-entered the cabin 4 minutes later, empty-handed. She moved through first class without pausing at row 2. She did not look at seat 2A. Evelyn turned another page. Richard Howell had stopped reading his documents entirely. He sat with the folder closed on his knee, watching Diane with the particular patient attention of a man who spent his professional life identifying patterns and understanding what they meant. He had been in first class on hundreds of flights. He had observed flight attendants work through hundreds of service runs. He knew what attentive service looked like, and he knew what selective inattention looked like. And he knew with the same certainty he brought to a jury argument exactly which one he was watching. On Diane's third pass through the cabin, she reached across the tray table in 2A to adjust the overhead air vent. Her forearm caught the edge of Evelyn's reading glasses case, a small rectangle of dark green leather resting on the corner of the tray, and knocked it cleanly off the surface. It fell face down onto the carpet. Diane kept walking. She did not look down, did not pause, did not say, "Excuse me," or "I'm sorry," or "Let me pick that up for you." She continued toward the front of the cabin, as though the glasses case had fallen on its own initiative on a different aircraft, in a different version of this morning entirely. For a moment, nobody in first class moved. Then Richard Howell set down his champagne flute, unclipped his seatbelt, leaned across the aisle, and picked up the glasses case. He stood, stepped across, and placed it carefully on the edge of Evelyn's tray table. "Here you go, ma'am." Evelyn looked up at him. She studied his face for a brief, direct moment, the way she had looked at people her whole life, not quickly, but with genuine attention, the way her mother had taught her, because you could learn a great deal about a person in 3 seconds if you were actually paying attention. "Thank you, sweetheart." Her voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of someone offering something real. "That was kind of you." Richard returned to his seat. He picked up his champagne. He did not drink it. He set it down on the tray table and looked at it. In the rear galley, Sandra Reyes was restocking the beverage cart and working very hard at looking at something other than the first-class cabin. She had been with Horizon Air for 9 years. She had worked alongside Diane on 2 previous occasions. Both times she had seen things she had told herself were not her business, were not her place, were not her responsibility to act on. She was seeing them again now. The way Diane's service was technically precise at every row except one. The way each individual act, the water, never brought the glasses, not retrieved the eye contact, never made, was small enough on its own to be explained away and consistent enough in aggregate to be something else entirely. Sandra set down the bottle in her hand, pressed her back against the galley wall, stared at the ceiling for a moment. Some things are easier to see than they are to do something about. She had known this about herself for a long time. She did not like knowing it. At 8:31, the captain came over the interphone to announce final boarding and request the crew prepare for departure. Diane made one last walk through first class. Seatbacks, tray tables, carry-on bins, the practiced final check of someone who knew the routine well enough to perform it without thinking. She stopped at row 2A. She looked at the Bible, the worn leather purse, the thin gold bracelet. The old woman who had not once raised her voice or her eyes or her hand, who had simply continued to sit in her own seat reading her own book, as though nothing in this world could reach her. Something moved across Diane's face. It was not guilt. It was not doubt. It was closer to the particular frustration of someone who has been pressing on a wall that will not give who wanted a reaction who needed one, and found instead a stillness she did not know how to answer. She smoothed the front of her jacket, walked back to the galley. She still had not brought the water. Marcus looked at his grandmother. She was closing her Bible, marking her page with a folded receipt. He had watched the entire hour. He had counted the things Diane had done and the things she had decided not to do, and the sum of them sat in his chest like a stone. "Grandma," he said quietly, "what are you doing?" Evelyn placed the Bible in her purse, beside the worn leather of James's old bracelet, beside the gold wrappers from the Werthers, beside the small satellite phone, with 3 initials engraved on its case. She looked at her grandson. "Waiting," she said. And then from the front of the cabin came the sound of Diane's heels returning. The plane had not yet pushed back from the gate when Diane reappeared at the head of the first-class cabin. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her and made her announcement in the pleasant, practiced tone of someone delivering entirely ordinary information. "Ladies and gentlemen, before departure, we'll be completing a brief, random security verification. It's a routine precaution and will only take a moment. I appreciate your patience." She moved down the aisle. She passed row 1 without stopping. She glanced at Richard Howell in 2C and kept walking. She passed the couple in row 3 without stopping. She stopped at row 2A. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to the front of the aircraft." Evelyn Carter looked up from her lap. She had already returned the Bible to her purse. She was sitting with her hands folded and her shoulders level in the particular posture of a woman who had been expecting something like this since the moment Diane's heels first struck the boarding bridge. "I'm comfortable here, thank you. Ma'am, I need you to comply with crew instructions. This is a security matter." "I'd like to know what the security matter is." "It's a standard random verification." "It is not random." Evelyn's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You walked past every other passenger in this cabin without stopping." The precision of it settled over first class like a change in pressure. In row 3, the couple seated together went very still. Richard Howell had turned fully sideways in his seat and was watching with the patient, cataloging attention of a man who has spent his career observing people under pressure. "Ma'am, I am 72 years old and I am sitting in a seat I paid for." Evelyn's voice remained level, its surface as smooth as still water. "I am not going anywhere." Marcus was already on his feet. One step into the aisle, shoulders forward, voice low and controlled. "That's my grandmother. Her ticket was verified at the gate 20 minutes ago by your own agent. What exactly is the security concern?" "Sir, I need you to sit down. I need you to answer the question." "Sir." Diane's voice dropped into something flatter and harder, stripped of all remaining pretense of hospitality. "If you do not return to your seat right now, I will have you removed from this aircraft before we push back. I am being very clear with you." Marcus looked at his grandmother. Evelyn gave him a single small shake of her head, so slight it was barely visible, but entirely unambiguous. He sat slowly without looking away from Diane. Richard Howell spoke from 2C. His voice carried the particular measured weight of a man who had spent 27 years in federal courtrooms and knew precisely how much pressure a carefully constructed sentence could apply without raising itself above a conversational register. "Excuse me, I've been in this cabin for the better part of an hour. I have observed every interaction between you and this passenger. She has produced valid identification. Her ticket was confirmed by your gate agent. She has not raised her voice, made a threatening gesture, or done anything a reasonable person would characterize as a security concern." A deliberate pause. A deliberate scene. "What is the actual basis for this request?" Diane turned toward him. "Sir, this matter does not concern you." "I'm making it concern me." In the rear galley, Sandra Reyes had been standing at the beverage cart for the past 4 minutes without restocking anything. She had heard every word. She stood with one hand resting on the cart handle, her back to the cabin, her eyes fixed on the stainless steel panel in front of her. She was thinking about the 2 complaints she had heard about from other crew members over the years, stories passed at layover hotels in the low, careful tones people use when describing something they have decided is not their problem. She was thinking about Gloria Reyes, whom she didn't know, whose name she had heard exactly once. She was thinking about the cameras, 3 of them, in this cabin, and the phones she had seen raised in first class. She was thinking about how long it was possible to stand in a galley looking at a wall before the looking itself became a choice. The cart handle was cold under her palm. She did not move. At seat 2A, Diane leaned down. She dropped her voice into the register intended for a single pair of ears. But the cabin was quiet. And Marcus was close. And what she said was heard by more people than she intended. Look. The word was soft and final. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know what I'm looking at. I don't know who purchased this ticket for you, or what arrangement was made, but I know what kind of person sits in first class and what kind doesn't. One breath. People like you don't belong up here. You are making everyone uncomfortable, and I am asking you for the very last time, come with me before this gets much worse for you. People like you. The sentence landed across the entire first-class cabin like something with physical mass. Marcus's hands went rigid against his armrests. Richard Howell was completely still. The couple in row 3 had not spoken in 10 minutes, and they did not speak now. The 4 phones that had been raised quietly one at a time over the past several minutes continued recording without a sound. Evelyn looked up at Diane. Her expression carried no anger, no tears, no flinching of any kind. It was something far older and more complete than any of those things, the look of a woman who had heard this sentence before, in different voices, in different rooms, across the full length of 7 decades, and who had made her peace long ago with exactly how she intended to answer it. Say that again, she said. Diane straightened. Her chin lifted. Her arms crossed over her chest with the finality of someone who had committed to a position and intended to hold it regardless of what it cost. I said you don't belong here. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak. And before she could form a single word, Diane's hand came forward. Diane's palm connected with Evelyn's left cheek with a sound that had no business being as sharp as it was. It was not a calculated blow. It was not a strike born of deliberate, premeditated force. It was the particular kind of violence that happens when something that has been building across months and years and buried complaints finally breaks through the last thin membrane of restraint and moves before the mind can intercept it. Open palm. Full contact. The motion of a body that has made an irreversible decision in the half-second before the brain understood it was being made. The crack split through the first-class cabin like something structural giving way. Evelyn's reading glasses replaced on the bridge of her nose 10 minutes earlier after Richard Howell had retrieved them from the carpet, flew from her face, and skidded the length of 2 seat rows before coming to rest at the base of the row 3 divider. The cabin went absolutely and completely still, not the ordinary quiet of a plane before departure. Not the comfortable inattention of people lost in devices and newspapers. This was the specific, total airless silence that descends in the moment after something irrevocable has occurred, when every person present has registered what just happened, but not yet fully absorbed the reality of it, and the world holds its breath in the gap between. Nobody moved, nobody made a sound. Marcus was out of his seat before the echo had finished traveling the length of the cabin. He crossed half the distance to Diane in a single motion and stopped himself there. One arm out momentum arrested the full force of his body held at the edge of a decision he could not take back. He stood in the aisle with his fists at his sides and his chest working hard, every instinct in direct conflict with every calculation. From 2C, Richard Howell was on his feet. What in God's name are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you just... From somewhere in the rows behind first class, a woman's voice cut through the silence in a single involuntary syllable of pure shock. 4 phones were recording. The hands holding them were barely aware they had moved. Sandra Reyes heard the sound from the rear galley. It was unmistakable, sharp and flat and wrong, in a way that the body recognizes before the mind does. The bottle she was holding left her hand and found the shelf by some instinct that was not conscious. She walked to the galley threshold and looked into first class, and what she saw made her press one hand flat and hard against the wall beside her. Diane stood at the center of the aisle with her palms still slightly extended. Her breath coming fast and shallow, her face flushed with the specific, terrible color of someone who has just crossed a line they knew somewhere beneath all the certainty they could not uncross. She stood there for 3 long, motionless seconds, and whatever she had expected to happen in the aftermath of that motion compliance tears retreat the vindication of someone who would now behave as she had insisted they should, none of it appeared. Evelyn. May Carter sat perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not recoil or gasp or press her hands to her face. She did not make a sound. The red mark bloomed warm across her left cheek, and she sat with her hands open on her thighs and absorbed what had happened with a stillness so complete and so unbroken that the cabin itself seemed to grow quieter around her, as though the plane were taking its cues from her. Then she looked at her hands. Then she looked up at Diane, and she said 2 words that nobody in first class was expecting. "Thank you." The words settled into the pressurized air of the cabin like something solid dropped into still water. Diane's mouth opened. Her eyes blinked once, twice. "Excuse me." "Thank you." Evelyn's voice was steady and clear, without a single tremor in it, in the way that the voices of people who have been through real things are sometimes steady, not because they feel nothing, but because they learned long ago how to hold what they feel without letting it run the room. "You just made this very simple for me." She reached into the worn leather satchel at her feet. She moved with the unhurried, deliberate precision of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for and exactly where it lives. What she produced was not the Bible. It was not the Georgia driver's license or the boarding pass on her phone. It was a matte black satellite phone. Compact. Unadorned. The kind of device that is not sold in retail stores built for people whose calls need to connect the first time anywhere in the world, without question. The case was custom dark metal, smooth and dense, and on the lower right corner engraved in letters no larger than a thumbnail, EMC. Marcus, still standing in the aisle with his fists at his sides, recognized the phone in an instant. He had seen it in 3 boardrooms. He had watched it appear on a conference table in Houston when a negotiation went sideways and produce in 4 minutes a set of consequences that the other party had not recovered from in 2 years. The moment he saw it, he unclenched his hands. He took 1 step back. He found his seat and lowered himself into it without a word, because he knew what came next. He just needed to stay out of the way of it. Diane looked at the phone, then at the engraved initials, then at the old woman's face, 72 years old, lavender dress, reading glasses somewhere on the carpet, left cheek beginning to darken, holding a device that looked like it belonged to a different category of person entirely than the one Diane had decided she was dealing with. Something moved through Diane's face. It was not guilt. Not yet. It was something more immediate, the first faint, cold awareness arriving before the full understanding could follow that the ground beneath this situation was not what she had believed it to be. Evelyn raised the phone to her ear. "Carter Legacy Group Executive Line." Evelyn's voice was soft, unhurried, and entirely without drama. "This is Evelyn. Get me Robert." The executive line placed her on a brief hold. 7 seconds. Then a click. Robert Chen had been the CEO of Horizon Air for 4 years. He was 51, disciplined, experienced, and had built a quiet reputation in the aviation industry for exactly the kind of steadiness that major airline operations require, the ability to receive very bad information very quickly and respond to it with something resembling functional intelligence. He had navigated a fuel pricing crisis, a collapsed merger, At the final regulatory stage, a winter storm that had simultaneously grounded 43 aircraft across 8 airports and an 11-month labor negotiation that had come within 72 hours of a full strike. When his phone displayed the name E.M. Carter, he picked up before the second ring had finished. "Mrs. Carter, good morning. Happy birth. Robert." Her voice carried the same quality it always carried in a situation that required his complete attention, clear level, stripped of everything that was not essential. "I'm aboard Flight 447. I need 3 things from you immediately. Pull the live manifest for this flight. Access the first-class in-cabin security camera footage, beginning 45 minutes before current time. And I need you to call the captain of this aircraft within the next 2 minutes. A single beat. We have a situation." She did not raise her voice. She did not use the words assault, or discrimination, or lawsuit. She named the 3 things she needed with the precision of someone who had spent decades in rooms where precision determined outcomes, and she stopped talking. The silence on Robert's end lasted approximately 4 seconds. He was not a man who required repetition. "I'm on it right now. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Robert. 2 minutes." She ended the call. 53 seconds start to finish. The second call connected on the second ring. Lena Morrison had been Evelyn's private attorney for 18 years. She did not say good morning. She said, "Tell me. I'm on a commercial flight. First-class cabin. One of the crew members has spent the past hour racially profiling me, escalating the situation in stages, lying to other passengers about having confirmed my identity, and approximately 3 minutes ago struck me across the face with an open hand." Evelyn's voice remained entirely without agitation. "There are recordings from at least 4 passengers, and the aircraft's own security system covers 3 camera angles. I need a formal assault and battery filing initiated before we land in Chicago, and I need it pursued completely. No settlement conversations, no reduction of charges, all of it." Lena asked one question. "Yes," Evelyn said. "All of it." 31 seconds. The third call went to Horizon Air's Director of Corporate Security. Flight number, tail number, crew member's full name, as it appeared on the pre-flight manifest specific documentation requirements for the formal incident record. A written report to her Chicago office by end of business. Footage preserved under legal hold effective immediately. 19 seconds. 3 calls. 1 minute and 43 seconds. Total. She placed the phone on her tray table with the deliberate, careful motion of someone setting something down exactly where it belongs, and folded her hands in her lap. Diane had not moved from the center of the aisle. She stood with her arms no longer crossed, her hands loose at her sides, watching Evelyn with an expression that had traveled well beyond shock, and was now somewhere without a clear name. The certainty that had carried her through the past hour, the absolute load-bearing confidence with which she had questioned a boarding pass, demanded an ID, made a call to the gate, passed a seat 3 times without water, knocked a glasses case to the floor, and finally raised her hand. All of it had not simply dissolved. It had undergone a more disorienting process. It had turned slowly and completely into the specific cold presentiment of someone whose understanding of the ground beneath them is being revised without their permission. She kept looking at the phone. The matte black case, the 3 engraved initials, the way it had appeared from inside a worn leather purse, like something that didn't belong to the same story she had been telling herself since 8 o'clock that morning. Richard Howell had not sat back down. He stood at his full height beside the seat 2C, watching Evelyn complete the calls, with the expression of a man whose professional life had given him a thorough education in the way power actually moves through a situation, not loudly, not visibly, but with exactly this kind of quiet, surgical, irreversible efficiency. When Evelyn placed the phone on the tray table, he spoke. "Ma'am?" I want you to know that I will provide a full sworn statement regarding everything I witnessed from the moment you boarded this aircraft. Every detail. Evelyn looked at him with the direct, genuine attention she gave to people she had decided to trust. Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate that. He nodded once and turned to Marcus, who sat with his arms folded and his jaw set, and an expression of pride so fierce and so tightly controlled that it was visible from across the aisle. Who is she? Richard asked quietly. He had the sense that he already knew the answer in some form, that it had been available to him for the past several minutes, and he had simply been waiting to confirm it. Marcus looked at him, took one breath. She owns the airline. The sentence went through Richard Howell, the way certain sentences move through a person when they reorganize something fundamental. He looked at the phone on the tray table, at the engraved initials, at the worn leather purse with the gold-bracketed clasp, at the thin bracelet on the wrist of the woman who had just made 3 calls in under 2 minutes that had set in motion consequences he could already professionally begin to map. This airline. It was not quite a question. 51% of it, controlling stake. The public announcement is scheduled for Tuesday. Richard sat back down, slowly. He picked up his champagne glass. He held it for a long moment. He did not drink it. In the rear galley, Sandra Reyes had opened her tablet and found the email. The Internal Horizon Air Communication. 6 weeks old. Subject line, Welcome to the Carter Legacy Family. She had known in the particular way that a person knows a thing they have been working to avoid, that she needed to read it. So she had. Evelyn May Carter, majority shareholder, controlling acquisition, effective date, board signatures. The photograph of Evelyn at the signing table, the same lavender dress, the same thin gold bracelet, the same worn leather purse set on the table beside the documents. Sandra read it twice. Then she looked toward the first-class cabin, toward the woman in seat 2A, sitting with her hands folded, and the phone on the tray table, and the mark still visible on her cheek. And something moved through Sandra's chest that was shame and relief in proportions she was not ready to examine, but could not any longer pretend she did not feel. She set the tablet down. She was done looking at walls. At the front of the aircraft, the cockpit interphone buzzed twice. Captain David Okafor answered it. Whatever was said on the other end took less than 30 seconds. His expression changed completely within the first 10. He replaced the handset, unclipped his seatbelt, and rose to his full height inside the narrow cockpit. He pushed open the cockpit door and stepped into the aisle. In 22 years of flying, he had left the cockpit before departure exactly 4 times. Every single time, his face had worn the expression it wore right now, controlled, deliberate, and moving fast toward something that needed to be corrected. He walked through the curtain and entered first class. Captain David Okafor was 53 years old and had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years. He stood 6 feet 1 inch tall and carried the particular physical presence of someone whose profession had required in ways both obvious and subtle that other people trust him completely with their lives. He wore his uniform with the quiet authority of a man who understood what it represented and had never once taken that representation lightly. He moved through the curtain and into the first-class cabin and took in the scene the way pilots take in instrument panels comprehensively, rapidly, and in a specific order of priority. Evelyn Carter. Seat 2A. 72 years old. Hands folded in her lap. A mark visible on her left cheek that was in the process of deepening from red into something darker. Expression composed, level, entirely without panic. Marcus Carter, seat 2B. Arms folded. Jaw set, watching the captain's approach with an alertness that was not quite hostility and not quite relief. Richard Howell, seat 2C. Still standing. His expression carried the formal, carefully managed outrage of a witness who has decided to remain exactly that and is containing himself with visible effort. Diane Kowalski, standing in the center of the aisle with her hands loose at her sides, and an expression that David Okafor recognized immediately, the look of someone whose understanding of their situation had in the past several minutes undergone a revision so complete that the body did not yet know how to carry itself through the aftermath. He took all of this in approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Carter." He chose each word with the precision he applied to instrument readings. "I just came off the phone with corporate. I've been briefed." A pause. "I am deeply sorry for what happened on this aircraft, for what you were subjected to, and for the fact that you were aboard for nearly an hour before I knew any of it." He turned to Diane. "Ms. Kowalski." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "Step to the rear of the aircraft, right now." Diane's mouth opened. "Captain, this passenger was being—" "Right now, Diane." The use of her first name in that register from that altitude of authority closed her mouth immediately. She turned and walked toward the rear of the plane with the rigid, careful motion of someone whose legs are following instructions their body is not entirely behind. Captain Okafor watched her go. Then he turned back to Evelyn and did something that no operational manual had ever prepared him for, and no training had ever covered. He lowered himself to one knee in the aisle beside seat 2, bringing himself to eye level with the woman sitting there, rather than standing over her, and he looked at her directly. "Is there anything I can do for you right now, Mrs. Carter?" Evelyn studied his face the way she had studied faces her entire life, with genuine attention, measuring what a person was made of, rather than what they were presenting. "You can remember something," she said. "Ma'am, you shouldn't have to know who I am for me to deserve to be treated with basic human decency." Her voice carried no accusation, no performance. It was simply a fact stated plainly and without decoration by a woman who had been stating it in one form or another across 7 decades. "That's all." Captain Okafor did not speak immediately. He let the sentence sit where she had placed it, because it deserved to sit there, rather than be hastily covered with the inadequate material of apology. "I hear you," he said finally. "I will remember it." He rose. He looked at Marcus, who gave a single nod. Then he walked toward the rear of the aircraft where the conversation he needed to have was waiting. Diane was standing in the galley with her back against the service counter and her arms wrapped around herself. Sandra Reyes stood in front of her tablet in hand, with the particular expression of someone who has finally made a decision they had been postponing for too long, and has discovered on the other side of it that the postponing was the hardest part. "Diane," Sandra turned the tablet screen outward. "The Internal Horizon Air Memo. 6 weeks old. Subject line: Welcome to the Carter Legacy Family. Evelyn May Carter. Majority shareholder. Controlling acquisition. Effective date. Board signatures. And a photograph. Formal a boardroom table Evelyn at the signing ceremony. The same lavender dress. The same thin gold bracelet catching the light. The worn leather purse set on the table beside the documents as though it had sat in rooms like this 1,000 times before, because it had." Diane read it. Her eyes moved through the words once, then stopped, then went back to the beginning and moved through them again. The color left her face the way heat leaves a surface that has lost its source quickly, completely, in a manner that could not be reversed by wanting it back. The word came out unfinished. "She actually owns 51%, Sandra said. Her voice was quiet and even. "Controlling stake. As of 6 weeks ago. It was in the company-wide memo, Diane. You had the same email I had." Diane's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out with a hand that was not entirely steady. A text from her Horizon Air supervisor. "Do not speak to the passenger. Report directly to compliance upon landing." Your employment status is under immediate review. Before she could process it, a second notification arrived. Human Resources. Subject line visible in the preview pane. Notice of suspension pending investigation. Then a third. The Regional Director of Operations, a name she associated only with situations that had already moved past the point of management into something worse. She did not open it. She stood in the galley with 4 unread messages on her phone, and the tablet still facing her with the photograph. She could not stop looking at the woman in the lavender dress at the signing table with the leather purse. The same woman who was sitting in seat 2A right now, with a mark on her cheek that Diane's own hand had put there, holding a matte black satellite phone with 3 engraved initials and a direct line to the CEO of the airline Diane had spent 12 years working for. Her phone buzzed a 4th time. Her mother's name on the screen. She stared at it. She did not answer. Outside the oval windows, the sky above Georgia was clear and golden and entirely indifferent to everything that had just been set in motion 40,000 feet below it. Flight 447 touched down at Chicago O'Hare International Airport at 10:47 in the morning, 11 minutes ahead of schedule. By then, the footage had already been in the world for 90 minutes. The first passenger to post had done so at cruising altitude at 34,000 feet, using the aircraft's onboard Wi-Fi 20 minutes after the slap. A 43-second clip, slightly unsteady at the edges, but clear where it mattered, the crack of the impact, the glasses spinning through the air, the absolute stillness of the woman in seat 2A, and 2 words delivered in a voice so composed it seemed to belong to a different category of person than the scene surrounding her. Thank you. By the time a second passenger uploaded a longer recording capturing the full exchange, the random verification announcement, the lean down, the whispered sentence, the original clip had 14,000 views. When the third and fourth recordings appeared, offering 2 additional angles, the comment sections across all 4 posts were filling faster than the platforms could moderate. People like you don't belong up here. That sentence was now on its way to being heard by millions of people who had never boarded Horizon Air Flight 447 and never would. It traveled with the specific, unstoppable velocity of something that locates a nerve the culture has been pressing on for decades and does not let go. The jetway extended at Gate K-14. The aircraft door opened. 2 Chicago Police Department officers and a pair of airport security supervisors were already positioned at the gate, having been contacted 40 minutes earlier by Horizon Air's Director of Corporate Security per the instructions Evelyn had given during the 3rd call at cruising altitude. Diane Kowalski was escorted off the aircraft first before a single passenger unbuckled. She moved the length of the jetway between the 2 security supervisors, with her roller bag trailing behind her and her uniform jacket slightly askew, and her hair no longer quite as precise as it had been in Atlanta. 1 CPD officer fell into step alongside the group. She did not speak. She did not look back. Robert Chen was waiting at the gate. He had flown from Atlanta on the first available commercial flight after Evelyn's call landing at O'Hare 40 minutes before Flight 447. He stood at the edge of the gate entrance in a dark suit with no tie, unusual for him, and his face carried the particular, hollowed quality of the man who had spent the previous 2 hours reviewing 3 security camera feeds on a laptop in an airport lounge, while his legal team reached him every 12 minutes. Evelyn emerged from the jetway. Robert took 1 step forward. Marcus stepped cleanly into the space between them. Not aggressively, not loudly, simply present with the quiet authority of someone who had been asked to be exactly here and understood what it required. Mr. Chen, I need to speak with Mrs. Carter. I need her to understand that I take complete responsibility for— Mrs. Carter is aware of your position. Marcus's voice was even without hostility. She's asked me to handle this. Robert looked past Marcus. Evelyn was already moving through the gate area with the unhurried composure of someone who had a granddaughter's graduation to attend and intended to arrive on time. She did not look at Robert Chen. Not out of anger. She had already said what needed to be said from 30,000 feet in the air, and she had no additional words to spend on this particular conversation today. Marcus extended a sealed envelope. Robert took it. He looked at it for a moment in the way people look at things they already know the contents of. He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Richard Howell caught up to Evelyn near the terminal exit. He had his briefcase in one hand, and the look of a man who has witnessed something he intends to be accountable for. "Ma'am, I gave my full contact information to the security supervisor at the gate. Complete sworn statement, everything from the moment you boarded, whatever the legal process requires." Evelyn looked at him, studied him with the direct, unhurried attention she gave to people she had decided were genuine. "You picked up my glasses," she said, "when no one else moved. That is what I'll remember about you." He stopped walking. She continued. He stood at the edge of the terminal corridor and watched her go, and the expression on his face was not the satisfaction of a man who had done something admirable. It was the sobered, slightly uncomfortable expression of a man who was reckoning with how long it had taken him to do something so small. Sandra Reyes gave her statement to the CPD officers at Gate K-14. She spoke for 13 minutes. She described the ID check the water that was never brought, the glasses case knocked to the floor, the whispered words she had heard from the galley threshold, and the sound, that flat, unmistakable crack that had traveled the length of the aircraft and found her at the beverage cart. She described 2 stories she had heard from other crew members over the years, names she could not verify, but details she could not have invented. She described standing at a wall for too long. When she finished, the officer looked at his notepad before looking up. "Why are you telling all of this?" he asked, not unkindly. Sandra considered the question for a moment. "Because I've been not telling it for long enough," she said. The 4 videos were colliding across every platform by early afternoon. By 2 o'clock Chicago time, the hashtag had reached the national trending list. By 6, journalist Carla Washington opened the national evening news broadcast with 3 minutes of uninterrupted footage, and before pressing play, exactly 4 words of commentary. "Watch this. Just watch." 18 million views by midnight, 40 million by Friday morning. The phones at Horizon Air's corporate communications office stopped being answered by 8 p.m. because there was no longer any point in answering them. Horizon Air's stock opened down 4.2% the following morning. The board convened an emergency session before the markets had been open 40 minutes. The item that consumed the most time was not the share price. It was a document pulled from the compliance archives, a file containing 2 formal complaints, both submitted by black passengers, both downgraded and buried, both bearing the name of the crew member who was currently in a Cook County processing facility, while her attorney fielded calls from 4 local television stations. The board looked at the document, then at each other, then at the footage which one of them pulled up on a laptop and played without sound, because the sound was no longer necessary to understand what it contained. The criminal case moved through the Cook County court system with the efficiency reserved for matters where the evidence does not leave room for interpretation. Diane Kowalski was charged with battery and making a false statement to an air carrier security officer, the second charge arising from her description of Evelyn as aggressive in her pre-boarding call to the gate, a call that had been recorded logged and was now part of the formal evidentiary record alongside 4 passenger videos and 3 angles of in-cabin security footage. Her attorney entered an initial not guilty plea and spent 3 weeks reviewing the materials before advising his client in the plainest possible terms that proceeding to trial meant playing all 26 minutes of footage on a screen large enough for every juror to read every expression clearly. The prosecution declined the first plea offer, and the second. The evidence was unambiguous. The public attention was focused, and the district attorney's office had determined that a trial served the interest it was meant to serve. The trial lasted 3 days. On day 1, the prosecution played the combined footage, 4 passenger recordings, and the aircraft's own security feed on a 6-foot screen without narration, without interruption. The jury watched in the particular quality of silence that descends when people are seeing something they cannot explain away. The footage ran for 26 minutes. The prosecutor said almost nothing before pressing play, and almost nothing afterward. She let the video carry the argument. It was more than sufficient. On day 2, Diane took the stand. Her attorney had prepared her carefully. She described the accumulating stress of the morning, the late alarm, the argument, the clipped mirror, with genuine-sounding regret. She said she had not been thinking clearly. She said the situation escalated in ways she had not intended. She said she did not see color. She said she was sorry. On day 3, the prosecution asked a single question on cross-examination. Ms. Kowalski, if a white woman of the same age wearing the same dress and carrying the same purse had been sitting in seat 2A when you boarded that aircraft, would you have asked her for her identification? Diane opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I would have treated anyone the same way, she said. The prosecutor nodded, thanked her, then played a 90-second clip from the aircraft security footage, a white catering delivery driver walking the length of the first-class cabin that morning to deliver a meal order, not stopped, not questioned, not subjected to a single word from the woman who would, 40 minutes later, demand government-issued identification from a 72-year-old black woman whose identity had already been fully confirmed by the gate. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 9 minutes. Guilty. Both counts. Judge Patricia Monroe, 40 years on the Cook County bench, sentenced Diane Kowalski to 14 months probation, 250 hours of community service, mandatory bias rehabilitation, and a permanent lifetime ban from employment in the aviation industry in any capacity. A criminal record that would not be sealed. No incarceration, but no pathway back to the only professional life she had built. Diane stood at the defense table and looked at the floor when the verdict was delivered. Not with the trembling, tissue-dabbing performance she had brought to the witness stand. With the flat, hollowed stillness of someone who has spent every available argument and arrived finally at the end of them. The civil case was resolved out of court. Horizon Air's legal team reviewed the prior complaints surfaced by the internal investigation, Gloria Reyes's letter from 2021, Darnell Burke's downgraded filing from 2019, and a third complaint from 2022 that had never been formally logged but had been recovered from a deleted email folder by the investigation team, and concluded without extended deliberation that a trial was not in the company's interest in any measurable dimension. The settlement was $2.8 million. Evelyn donated every dollar. $1.5 million went to a program providing full aviation career scholarships for young black women at 3 historically black colleges and universities, covering flight school aviation management and aerospace engineering over a 4-year cycle. $800,000 went to a senior citizen legal defense fund, providing free civil rights representation to elderly individuals in housing and financial disputes. The final $500,000 was donated in the name of James Carter Sr. to the Boys and Girls Club on Lamar Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee, the organization James had volunteered with for the last 12 years of his life, driving children to weekend programs in a Carter transport vehicle, the way he had always believed a man ought to use what he had been given. At the Chicago press conference announcing the donation, Evelyn stood behind a podium in the lavender dress. The thin gold bracelet. The worn leather purse on the table beside the microphone. My husband James drove a taxicab, she said. He served people every single day of his working life, and he never once imagined his name would appear on the side of an airplane. But it does now. and it will stay there. A pause, quiet and full. What happened to me happened because a woman looked at me and decided before I spoke a single word what I was. I am not unique in that experience. I am only unusual in having had the resources to ensure the story did not end there. She looked at the room. What about the woman who doesn't have those resources? What happens to her? The room was quiet. That question traveled further than anything else she said. It was quoted in editorials, read into congressional records, printed on shirts, and painted on walls in cities Evelyn had never visited, because it named something the footage, for all its 26 unambiguous minutes, could not quite reach on its own. Sandra Reyes was promoted to senior cabin crew trainer at Horizon Air, leading the implementation of the company's new accountability protocols. She accepted the role with one request: that the training program's opening slide display a photograph of Evelyn May Carter at the signing table. Not as a warning. As a fact about what a person can be sitting quietly in seat 2A when the world has decided it already knows. Marcus Carter enrolled in aviation law at Georgetown University Law Center that fall. His application essay described a Tuesday morning in October, a lavender dress, a sound like something structural giving way, and two words spoken into the aftermath with a stillness he spent the entire essay trying and failing to adequately describe. Robert Chen resigned at the end of the quarter. His replacement was appointed by the Carter Legacy Board. Diane Kowalski completed her probation, completed her hours, completed the rehabilitation program, left Chicago, changed her number. The footage never stopped circulating. The aviation ban was permanent, and she did not attempt to challenge it. Evelyn May Carter went back to work the following Monday. Same leather purse, same lavender dress, same thin gold bracelet on her left wrist, the one James had fastened there in the summer of 1974 at New Hope Baptist Church in Memphis, with both their families watching. She walked into the Carter Legacy Group offices in Buckhead at 8:45, nodded to the receptionist, asked about her daughter's dance recital, took the elevator to the 14th floor. On her desk, a framed photograph of James Carter Sr. in 1971, standing beside the taxicab that started everything. 22 years old, smiling the smile of a man who knows something the world hasn't caught up to yet. She sat down. She opened her calendar. She began her day. Dignity is not something you earn by the size of your bank account or the label on your bag. It is something you carry in the way you remain standing when the world tries to make you kneel. Evelyn Carter didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She simply refused to become small. And when the truth finally landed, it landed completely. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell me what would you have done in that seat. And if you believe dignity should never require a balance sheet to be respected, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. These stories matter.